Newsflash, we're all gonna die, so why don't you just decide to enjoy the ride and laugh with the air like you care, but you don't, and you're broke and you love it anyway.
Good Grief is a podcast that hopes to relieve those who grieve, where it's all about life and death, but isn't all life or death. A conversation where art and heart collide. So sit, stand, drive, or lie down under covers to laugh and cry. This podcast picks up after the fall, after death, and before life, and choosing to live again. To examine what aspect of them is in you. If we're to suppose there are 5 stages of grief, I believe the final stage is taking the stage itself. So thank you for joining me. We're the inaugural Zoom Good Grief podcast, where we usually, I say we, but it's pretty much me running this battle station right here, like to say that there are, 5 stages of grief, this being the 6th stage, taking the stage itself, where kind of we give a voice to the person who was lost and, bring them to life through your words, and hear a little bit about, in this case, your father, who I'd love to talk to you about, ties in with, you got a new collection, a new book.
I do.
It's out.
Product placement time.
Right.
Product time.
SEANCE, and we'll get into the meaning of that word a little bit later. But right from the start, there's like a pretty revealing author's note right in the beginning, where you kind of set the tone for the rest of the book. But a lot of personal information is revealed.
Yes.
Some about your family. Some things that we have talked about, but a lot of things, I wasn't aware that your dad and your mom met in Israel, correct?
That is correct. Yeah. Basically, they were both running away from home, and they just found each other. Interesting thing, my mother was like the one who thought herself least likely to be able to find a husband in Israel, and she was the one who found him.
She was born there?
No, she was born in. She was born in America. She's a native New Yorker. My
Nice.
father's from Johannesburg, South Africa.
That's right. So from Johannesburg, was he fleeing at the time? Something there
Well,
born Jewish, or
part of it was apartheid. Another part of it was the fact that he had a stroke, like a year or so prior to heading over to Israel. And he just wanted to run away from his family. He was a very staunch opponent to apartheid.
Right.
So, and then with my mother, she had been to Israel on a class trip in college, and then essentially she found an opportunity, and they lived in Israel for about a year and a half, and got married and moved back here.
Wow. And you have subsequently, when was the first time you were when you were in Israel?
First time I was in Israel was back in 2003, going into 2004. It was a birthright trip.
Oh, you were birthright, yeah.
Yeah, I did birthright.
Nice. Me as
Nothing wrong with that.
Yep. Great. How old were you when you were on birthright?
I believe I was 22.
22? It's a good age for it, I think. I mean, it depends what you're looking for. Your views are set in stone, or you're highly impressionable when you're out there. Because
Exactly.
Right. So that's a good age where you still, you've seen some of the world a little bit, or some stuff. But
absolutely, I had just graduated from college at that point, so it was just like a nice little relief from having to jump into the real world.
Right. Now, were you able to go to where your parents met at all? Do you know?
I did.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I did. They had lived in a settlement called Arad.
Okay.
Which is by the Dead Sea. And so I had stayed at a hotel there for New Year's Eve. Well, what would be New Year's Eve for us, obviously, you know, Sylvester for them. But I got to meet some of my family members while there. And yeah, that was around where I went to swim in the Dead Sea, and may the Dead Sea live. I've not been hearing good things about it.
These days, you're saying?
Dry, just like drying up and what have you.
Right, right. Yeah, the super float. Oh, we got an extreme rainstorm just as you said that, which the sky just completely opened up outside here.
Mine is probably going to be opening up quite a bit also. It's raining here, but we're supposed to be getting wind at like 3 o'clock, I think.
So how did you guys end up in Staten Island? Was there a place before this in New York? You were saying you had near Willowbrook, right? But how?
Right.
What was the first house that you were to get in the same place that you're in now, or?
I lived in 3 different places. One of them was in the Fort Wadsworth area of Staten Island, which is like kind of on the east side. I then lived a good part of my childhood in Castleton Corners, which is like more along the lines of the North Shore. And now where I live in Willowbrook, it's kind of like Midwestern kind of in the island. But most of my life has been spent in Willowbrook. A good part of my life I do owe to my old home. I have written quite a number of poems about the neighborhood and
Right.
Staten Island and what have you. But most of my memories do come from that 4-family house in Staten Island I grew up in.
Yeah. So how did you end up in Staten Island to begin with? That was where your mom had some early roots, or?
Well, actually, I was born in Staten Island. I'm a first-generation Staten Islander. My mother's from Long Island, and they basically lived in Queens before they moved to Staten Island back in 1978. And that was mainly because my father had a job in New Jersey, but for a while they were living in Briarwood.
And what was his first jobs out here?
He was a chemist. He was a research chemist, lab assistant. Well, his first job was a lab assistant, but eventually he did become a research chemist at Hoffman LaRoche.
Wow. Now, were you into that sort of thing, like into science, and did you have a way into that, or did you early just gravitate towards arts?
You know, I think I have like kind of both brains bridged a little bit. I mean, I'm mostly a creative person, but you know, math has always been that one little analytical skill I've had. And I do have an interest in chemistry. I definitely have an interest in chemistry, especially in regards to some of the chemistry jokes that I used to tell my father, which cracked him up. But
oh yeah, we gotta hear. You got one?
Okay, let me see if I can think of one. Some of these are really bad, but
no, that's it. That's the element of like a good dad joke type deal.
Okay. All I know is that I just remember seeing this meme, and it had like 16 molecules of sodium, and then it had Batman. Na 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 Batman.
Yeah. Like it, if you know your periodic table. And your symbols. So you brought up, left brain, right brain, and I was thinking about that a lot before talking to you, that you to me seem like a good balance of both of those, where the book in particular, where you have these visual representations of, well, the author's note in itself, you're talking about your drawings, but there's visual representations of all the poems, the way they're laid out on the page.
Mm-hmm.
And then apart from that, the beautiful words that are encased in them throughout the course of the poem. And it feels like, there is kind of that balance. And I'm trying to think if you've taken that, from one parent had one side and another parent had the other side. And what I found to be quite interesting was your dad having had a stroke on one side of the body, and then it happened to be on the other side of the body.
Right.
And just kind of, those together, whether like, you're going through life leaning towards one side and then going through another part of life leaning towards the other side. And you as an observer are taking both of that in, and both sides are coming at you. So speak a little bit of that, if there is an influence from both parents, your art side and kind of that visual side.
I think that with my father was actually pretty good with both sides also. And the interesting thing about it is he was a visual artist, the photographer back in South Africa. And then on top of all that, he did have that interest in chemistry. And the one thing that I will always remember is that with my first chapbook, I actually did use a painting, or a what do you call it? A pen and ink drawing of a self-portrait he did.
Oh,
I used that on my first chapbook. It's currently out of print. It's called Never Lick the Spoon. But I remembered that I had used that, and I had done this like tie-dye type effect on this high school uniform that he was wearing for his boarding school. So it's like you had the jacket, the suit, the tie, but you also had like this huge pop of color coming out.
Yeah.
And the one thing that, I think my mother kind of has a little bit of both also. I think she's probably a little bit more analytical though. She enjoys writing, but she did a different type of writing. I mean, she used to write people's term papers in college, so, and essays. She considers herself definitely more of an essayist than she does a creative writer.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as where I get it from, I mean, I think I definitely get it from both sides, but I think probably the more creative side does come from my father, yeah.
Right. And when was the first that you did put pen to paper for you? Was there an initial spark from either of your parents that led you to kind of putting things down into a computer or onto paper, or that was you found a little bit longer, a little bit later?
I think there were always definitely times where I was doing a lot of writing, just for my own processing.
Journaling?
But I think that it wasn't really until 2002 when I actually decided to start writing on a regular basis and performing them at open mics. And it's 2020 now. Holy cow.
Look at that. And that is the high amount of years, I believe, since starting. Yes.
It is high. No, I definitely have a connection to that. I definitely have a connection to that number for sure.
Right. Well, then, speaking to that, your connection to, I guess, numerology and numbers, where, I mean, words and then numbers. But do you view numbers as words or as numerals?
It's interesting because, I have always found that, like, especially learning things like algebra, for example, it's almost like learning a different language. And that's kind of like another kind of quality that is just kind of like bridged my brains quite a bit when it comes to math and art. But I think that the thing that I really love about numbers is that they do have their own spiritual representations to them. I am big on numerology. I'm big on gematria. For those not familiar with gematria, it is basically like numerology that's done with Hebrew letters, where each of the letters are attributed a numerical value.
Right. And then
that greatly influences this. Yes.
Right. It's on like the dreidel too, right? Is that how they would score it? I mean, with
it's interesting. I never really thought of it that way, but I mean, I know that whole Nes Gadol Hayasham. I never exactly knew what the why they were like designated what you lose or what you gain or anything.
Right. Because it was just nun would just be none. Like it was half. It wasn't a number. It was like half, all, or none. I think.
Right.
Right.
Or just lose everything. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. So this connection, I guess, to the spirit world and the occult Now, did that happen for you before your father passed, or this was something that came out of that?
I think that I've done tarot reading for a very long time, but then I think, you know, when it came to the occult, I definitely got a lot more into it after my father passed away. I felt like he was always with me. I felt like I needed to find a way to honor him, and so
Right.
I have an altar with all of our photos on it, you know, just so that he's always remembered. And I do keep an altar outside and keep memories of him in that as well. Just offerings, kind of.
Right. So yeah, I mean, I always like to ask, is there any other thing that you find to be a physical representation of your father now, the altar itself, or is there something, whether it's in nature or that a possession that you have that you attach very strongly to your father?
Many of them. There are
Yeah.
many of them. Oh boy. As far as memories go of my father, I have a lot of memorabilia of masks. I have stamps, coins of South Africa. I have like photos that I've taken. As far as other memories go, I mean, there are just way too many of them. The big one I think that I attach a lot of value to is my old Commodore 64.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, my father used to enjoy doing programming on that. We
Oh,
used to get like these magazines that had like programming codes for different things that we could put on there. And I remember this because this is just like old school for me. The fact that I remember a certain programming language called MLX, which involved hexadecimals, like, you know, 0 through 9, A to F, all became their own numbers. And so you know, that's like kind of some old school geekery for all you people out there.
Yeah, I love it. So now, was he has some photographs, you say? What would be the things that he took pictures of mainly?
I don't remember everything, but I do remember that he would tell me stories about how he and his buddy Brian would just hang out in the dark room smoking cigarettes. I mean, I remember he would like talk about that. Plus, I think he also took this picture of, I cannot for the life of me remember which animal it was. I think it might have been either a giraffe or a lion. I can't remember what the animal was, but his nickname in high school was Mole.
Mole?
Mole, M-O-L-E.
Right.
So his nickname was Mole, and so like in his like, I guess his boarding school's newsletter, it says something along the lines of, this is a picture of a mole. This is a picture of a photograph. Oh, wait, I'm mixing it up. This is a picture of a giraffe taken by a mole.
Giraffe by a mole. Nice.
Yes.
My God, that's my favorite movie, El Topo. I don't know if you've seen the Alejandro Jodorowsky surrealist Western. And his character's called the Mole, El Topo.
Oh, El Topo, yes.
El Topo, right.
See, he got it from The Wind and the Willows.
Gotcha. Oh, man. Yeah, no, I'd love to see one of the photographs at some point.
I have to see if I can find them. I think they're like buried somewhere within my closets or something.
So we post that, we can, you know, share one of those if you're okay to it. So what I'm thinking a little bit too is, now you've tried to contact people from that have passed. I don't know with any degree of success, and what approach you go with that. Now, is there any science to a seance?
I think that if there is a science, it's kind of a science that can't even really be put into words. I mean, I do definitely feel his presence around me. I feel My aunt, his sister's presence around me. Really, I feel like that entire part of the nuclear family is around me. My father, his sister, my grandfather, and my grandmother. I feel like I can't explain how they're with me because I don't see anything. I just kind of feel vibrations. And there are definitely times where I feel like his soul is within my heart, and I
Right.
keep it with me wherever I go.
Vibrations. What did his passing have? How did it affect your religion at the time? Your connection to?
You know, it's interesting. I think I was kind of like in a bit of a dormant period when it came to being Jewish, and all I can really say about that is definitely being in a state of grief. It will damage you spiritually, and spiritually I definitely was damaged. I really genuinely felt that I lost direction. I lost really a lot of direction. I had just started college at that point.
Right.
I was going for a certificate in art therapy at the new school. I had literally just started before he died.
Yeah.
And it was my second session there that I had learned he passed away, like practically towards the beginning of that session. My mother hadn't called me at that point, but as soon as I left the class and I was heading on to the boat on the way home, the ferry, that's when I learned. And my mother just said, "Daddy's gone."
So
And
it was more of a sudden. The second stroke occurred without warning.
it occurred without, well, he had been in the hospital for 2 weeks after he had had the stroke. I remember when he had the stroke, he had it at the dinner table. And it's just such a crazy thing to think about because I remember so many details of that night he had the stroke, including the final Jeopardy category and question. It was like, who is Douglas MacArthur? Damned if I know, like, what it was in relation to, but I just remember hearing, who is Douglas MacArthur?
Right.
And
that's something you'll never forget for there. Mm-hmm.
And we were just shouting in his ears, spraying water on his face, and he just wasn't waking up, and we were just thinking to ourselves, there was something seriously wrong here. And this part of the story I don't always talk about, but we were high while it happened.
Wow.
We were stoned, and we were wondering what the hell are we gonna do, and we wound up calling 911, and we were like trying to like figure out a way to just kind of like broach the subject of, yeah, listen, my father had just smoked weed, so don't be surprised about anything that you find in there. And it was just so incredibly bizarre, just seeing him being carried out just without any kind of awareness. I remember going to the hospital, and I brought my iPad with me, and I was playing this one particular classical composition, Pathétique. I can't remember who the composer was. I think it might have been Tchaikovsky, but I'll double check that. But I remember playing it in his ears because I had heard so many stories about people coming out of comas whenever they hear familiar music, and it just didn't happen that way. In fact, that was the day that I had learned that he was not going to be able to breathe on his own. And so Mom and I that day made the difficult decision to take him off life support. We wanted to respect his wishes, that he didn't want to be kept alive under any kind of extraordinary measures. And 6 days later, he passed. It took 6 days for him to go.
And had you had some conversations or speaking to him during that 6-day period? Were you playing music or communicating with him in any capacity?
To be perfectly honest, it was very hard for me. It was hard for me to even go to the hospital at that point, because I think I had just gone once, and all I know is that I was in college, I was preparing for assignments and what have you, and all I know is that I was just under a lot of stress. I was like talking to people like day in and day out, keeping people updated on what was happening.
How are you with hospitals in general? Was it not a place you were comfortable going or into that environment often? Or
I think the thing is, I had been to that environment quite often,
right,
like as a visitor, and
yeah.
it just became a very frustrating thing for there to be some kind of hospitalization or some kind of fatality happening practically every moment in my adult life,
And yeah.
And I just know that when it came to books, especially when it came to me starting to write books, it seemed like there was always going to be an in memory of page somewhere in my book. It just seems like there was always like that type of thing happening, and okay, someone dies, they're gonna be getting an epitaph in there, So
Right. So your decision to do art therapy, that was before he was sick. What
right.
was the impulse for you to go in that direction, to study that specifically?
I had been working in mental health for quite some time. Can you see me?
Yeah, just
Okay. Yeah, I blanked out a bit. All right. I had been working in mental health for quite some time beforehand, and I was working at South Beach Psychiatric Center. Had done that for 5 years, and then took a little break from everything, and then decided to go back to school. And I had the option of either doing a master's of fine arts or a certificate program. I got rejected from the MFA in creative writing program, so wound up going towards the art therapy program that I did get accepted to. And it's just crazy because he had died shortly. I mean, not died. He had the stroke shortly before I was starting class.
Started, right. But
it's just freaky to me because I spent like that entire curriculum mourning the loss of my father and just doing these experiential exercises with art, basically all revolving around my father.
Now, so an art therapy major, now give me some perspective on it. Is that geared toward the idea of you being able to help others?
Yes.
That's the focus. So you definitely, as you should have been, you were consumed with your own grief, and you're kind of using it for yourself, that idea of art therapy. But in the early stages, is that what it becomes? Does the major become the art therapy for the person that is studying, or is it a function of, all right, I'm getting these tools so that I can assist others?
Definitely a little of column A, a little of column B. I felt that, in order for us to be effective therapists, we had to sort through our own stuff. And we had to make it a point to process our own hang-ups and issues in order to really relate to the people that we're working with.
Right. So could you talk about maybe one exercise or thing that you did during that time that you thought was helpful, that might have given you some solace at that moment, or, allowed you to kind of get a lot of some stuff out, gain a little bit more perspective? Any assignment in particular, or a lecture or something of that sort?
Definitely, I can think of a couple of them. One of them is the author's note, the house tree person assessment.
Yeah.
I'll explain a little bit about that. You're given 6 sheets of paper. On each sheet of paper, you have to draw a house, a tree, and a person in both pencil and in crayon. While I was doing this, the first drawing of the house was my old childhood house. Bricks, looked like a castle, and the one memory that I have of it is that it was just solid brick. And then after I moved, they later covered it all in concrete. The tree was my old Hanukkah bush.
Yeah.
And I just remember that, we would be trimming this Hanukkah bush while all of our neighbors were trimming their Christmas trees. And it was like, we all practically lived communally. So it was like kind of nice for all of us to see each other's setups and what have you. The person was my father. And I pretty much knew that that was going to be the first person that I was going to draw even before I started doing this assessment. Second house was in color, and it was the house I live in right now. You obviously won't be able to tell by the Washington Square arch, but all of the houses in my neighborhood are brown and white. And I just felt like there was just such a sense of monotony there, sense of conformity that I was just always looking to escape. Conformity, thine enemy, is my enemy in a lot of ways, especially as an artist and a poet. But I wanted to kind of outline the level of drabness. It's brown and white, but I did it in black and gray, because that's just generally how I viewed this neighborhood. But I also gave it a very blue sky, because the skylines were beautiful, even though the neighborhood sucked. So then we get the second tree. Second tree is an ash tree that I have called my tree of life in Willowbrook Park. Many people will know me as the Wizard of Willow, and that's basically where that comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And then the final drawing was the person, and the person was me. And I was drawn as a stick figure with a flame coming from my head and a cyan, magenta, yellow question marks coming from my head. I had just gotten to a point where it was like I was running out of bandwidth, I was running out of ink, I was running out of everything that I had. And that's basically where it left me. It just left me at a point where I just felt so exhausted and frustrated, and just in general, just playing the tape backwards to the last, what had been 32 years of my life at that point, and just kind of arriving at a place where I just couldn't even really be creative. I drew myself as a stick figure,
Yeah. So how was this helpful? The drawing of it, you feel like you got all of that stuff out in a visual manner,
right?
How did that become a tool for you to feel, I guess, for one thing, and then to feel better if it did?
I think it made it a lot easier for me to identify some of the deep-seated issues that I had thrown on that paper. There might have been certain things I might not have necessarily been able to really say without drawing them. Yeah. You really begin to realize exactly how many things are left unsaid in life, and how many things really don't have a lot of verbal equivalence, There are just certain things that you will always have a hard time saying, but may have an easier time expressing in other means. And what I wrote in the author's note is that I really had a lot more stuff going on than I had ever really thought of before he died.
That you weren't confronting, or that and then to see it all lined out like that. Now, you put that stuff out there, though. Now, is that then interpreted by somebody else? Do you share that with, I guess, is it a professor or another therapist, that then they interpret that, oh, this would mean that, and that, or then you're looking at it and being like, oh, now I see it. So is it given to somebody else to interpret in those.
It is given to somebody else, yes. I think for the sake of this class, we were encouraged to interpret our own process. We were encouraged to process our own drawings. And yeah, that in this book, it basically was practically the exact process paper that I had written for that class. So that author's note was written in 2014.
Got it. Oh, that's great. That's a fantastic note at the beginning. And I think that could be it. I mean, helpful to anybody to draw that. I mean, just it had me think of all the houses that I've lived in, and that's when your subconscious is really speaking, for you. You're out there, and then like anything that's locked up, and that can come through in pictures or in words. I've seen.
Always important to get it out of you.
What's that?
It's always important to get it out of you, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. The other thing that you mentioned that wasn't in that drawing was, so you had, I guess, shelter, you had the drawings, food. I just wanted to bring up for a second. Was there any particular dish you relate with which to your father? Or you said the last time you were together, you were actually having dinner too. But I just wonder how food plays into all of that, if there was any dish that you associate with family.
Oh, yes, there is. And the funny thing is, we had never had it together, but my father was always a big fan of steak tartare.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
I'll explain. If for those who don't know what steak tartare is, it's raw meat and an egg.
Nice.
That's basically all you need to know.
Yeah. Tuna tartare I've had, and then, in the Wagyu beef sometimes they would call it, but wow. So you didn't share it together, but you'll think of him when you dine that now as well, or?
Yeah, he always wanted to go to a restaurant and have steak tartare, and it just wasn't happening because food regulations, restaurant regulations and whatnot. He was not able to find it. And also Jack Daniels. I always associated Jack Daniels with him.
And Jack Daniels. Are there any other aspects of his personality that are strong within you?
Humor. Definitely humor.
Humor-wise, yeah.
Yeah, because I know he was a big fan of Monty Python.
Oh, nice.
That is always something that I'm going to carry with me. Just there'll be plenty of times where I'll just hear spam and immediately I'll just think to myself, oh, I don't like spam, and that'll just stick in my head forever. And just all of those sketches. He was a big fan of Benny Hill, also all of the British comedies.
Oh, the Benny Hill is just absurd. The theme song in itself, yeah, I loved it. So you'd watch that together?
Yeah, we'd watch that together. There'll be plenty of times on Channel 13, our local PBS affiliate, they'd have the British comedies all the time, like on the weekends. And so they'd have the newer stuff and the older stuff. And then, of course, BBC America, before they started showing newer programming, they would have Monty Python on the weekends. And then, of course, I kind of have a little bit of a soft spot for some of the mod comedies, mod shows like The Avengers and The Prisoner, The Saint,
Right. The how did his passing start to affect some of your other relationships outside of family, friends, potential partners? Was there?
That is a very interesting thing. Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very interesting thing because you just never know what's going to happen with your relationships after someone you love passes away. You never know when they're going to get stronger, and you just never know when they're going to get weaker. Yeah, and you just never know when it's just not going to exist at all.
Right. Well, I was just saying, some people, if you're in a relationship, they can't handle it. They don't know how to be supportive, or they're over, or maybe you don't want them to. But so were you in any type of relationship at the time? A, and B, was how did it affect even just friendships and kind of, what other support network did you have around you or did you shut that out for a period?
I basically all of the above. As far as relationship was concerned, I did go on a date with someone. I was hoping to go on a second date, and around the time that I was planning on going on a second date, it wound up happening that my father had the stroke, and it's
So
just
very early in the process. Yeah.
yeah, it sucks because it almost looks as if I'm the one doing the ghosting.
Right. Wow. Interesting way of use of the word in that context as well. But
Yeah, oh, yeah, that's a really crazy pun, isn't it?
yeah.
Wow.
And
Dad would appreciate that one, I think.
right. Well, and it's also, it's like, it's so early in the process. Should you even have to tell her all, like the details? Usually on a first date, sometimes you're not even going to get into, a parent situation as deeply.
Right. And so yeah, that was kind of like the end of that. But as far as friendships go, there were people who did come out of the woodwork to,
Yeah.
lend support, and there were people who wound up becoming better friends with me after my father died. But it was disappointing that there were just certain people who just kind of fell by the wayside. I mean, that's always going to be something that's going to be a trial. It's always a trial. You lose somebody, you wind up learning who's going to stick by you and who's not.
Right.
And it's always a disappointment when you learn who's not going to, but it just makes you that much more grateful for the people who do stick by.
No, for sure. Yeah, I don't know what that, I remember people coming to the funeral too that I would have expected that had shown up, when my mom passed. And the others that, just might not have had the capacity with which, but like they didn't want to confront that aspect within themselves that somebody, close to somebody could be lost. Now, so art therapy became, kind of your realm. Did you at any time seek out other forms of kind of therapy or talking about this when something had happened, or talk a little bit about really the after those weeks and months after?
Well, I've been in therapy for a while. I have been in therapy for a while, so I was making good use of that.
Right.
And ultimately, I wound up seeing an art therapist myself, as part of my internship, and then it continued after the internship. But I had used that as the basis of my last book, Art Therapy 101. A lot of those poems were centered around art pieces that I had made during my sessions and partially in class. As far as SEANCE goes, and this is the interesting part about it, SEANCE actually debuted on June 11th, 2020, and that's exactly 7 years after my father died.
Okay.
So that was not intentional by any means, but it just adds to the symbolism of it.
Right. That is a way of the communication. Can you talk of another incident when you've maybe felt that presence since 2013?
There are a number of things that do remind me of him. My father used to, because he had a stroke, he used to really grasp a soda bottle with a lot of force, and there would be a dent in there. But the crazy thing would be is that you would just never know when that dent was just gonna pop. And so every time like a soda bottle pops, I think of him, and that's like his way of signaling me. And the funny thing is, I have a good friend of mine who told me that at times where we may have fallen out of contact, she would hear those bottles pop and she'd think of me,
and then she think
because she'd be reminded of him.
Look at that. Oh, that's such a wonderful image of a soda bottle popping. My goodness. Yeah, like just one of those 2 liter.
Exactly.
Or the smaller ones. My goodness. So, what is your view? I know you seances talking, connecting to some of the dead. What kind of is your personal view of an afterlife, um, and where do people go after they die? Where might they be? What would be in two parts? Your view of what you believe, and then maybe an idealized version of what you would, if you could curate your own, what would that consist of?
I think that I do believe that the soul is eternal, even if the body is temporary.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer that, you know, we do travel from, you know, that, you know, the soul will carry on long after the body dies. I do genuinely believe that. Whether I believe in pearly gates or anything like that, I'm not so sure. But I definitely do believe in reincarnation. I do believe that I've probably been different people from different eras at different points. I've done visualizations before, like in meditation, and in one case, it was a Buddhist monk.
Right.
I did see myself as a Buddhist monk. I could see like the vividness of like the robe that I was wearing. And so, and I saw mountains, so I'm sure I was a Tibetan monk, but I've had, I mean, that's probably the most vivid one that I've seen. I can't really think of any other past life regressions that I've done, but that's definitely the strongest one.
So then now, using kind of imagination, what would be a one, if you could create it, what would that consist of? An afterlife in your mind, rather than what might actually be the case, or do those relate? But what would be kind of the idealized, the dream version of an afterlife in your mind?
That I would meet all of the members of my family I didn't get to meet, as well as animals. I would really like to believe that heaven is not segregated. I'd like to believe the Rainbow Bridge does lead to the mainland of heaven.
Right. And then would they be at the age with which they passed, or just you would connect via mind and bark?
I, I think that they would basically be in the state that they would be the happiest being in. You know, I think that whatever their true essence is, whatever their true essence wanted to be, it would exist in heaven.
Yeah.
So if Stephen Hawking was able to walk, it would be like the same situation with my father, that he would, I don't know whether he would prefer to be able-bodied in heaven, whether he'd prefer to have the same qualities he had when he met my mother and had me. It's unknown on earth, but in the other realm, it's the only way to tell.
Nice. So we're talking a little bit about your what did help you during that time, right? Mm-hmm. And grief is a tough thing. We can't deny that there may have been some times for you that were more difficult than others. Was there any particular stage or period that you did struggle with? Whether if we're talking about, you know, the stages of grief, anger, depression, bargaining, denial. Was there anything that a hurdle that you did find that there you were at for a while, and what was it that did help you to get over that or past that, or you're still kind of, you know?
I think probably out of all the stages, depression and anger were the worst.
Sure. So you were, how did that anger manifest for you? Did you lash out? Were you someone that would yell, or that would be channeled through writing, or what was that like?
I think, and I can pinpoint this, 2016 was when my anger really just started to come full force. I mean, there was just so much that I was holding back, and it just got to the point where I wound up having a nervous breakdown.
Right.
I thankfully was not hospitalized. I did spend some time in a respite center, and that's something I wholly recommend to anybody who is going through a crisis and doesn't want to get put on medication. Definitely recommend that. It's just a place, and I'll mention a little bit more of that connection later, but a respite center is a place where people can just kind of get away from their situation while they're in crisis. It's not heavily therapeutically intensive. There are people who work there who, in most cases, are peers, people who have been in positions of crisis or have mental health diagnoses. That's currently what I'm doing now. Currently, I am working as a counselor in a respite center.
Right. So that experience led you back to you found it was helpful for you, and then you wanting to then pay it forward and kind of do some of that similar thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it really did get me back into wanting to do mental health again, because even after I had graduated from the new school, I was kind of ambivalent about what I wanted for my future anyway. I had had a very rough year in 2015, especially with the internship in and of itself, because there were a lot of triggering feelings that were coming up during the internship, and I wasn't necessarily in the most supportive environment during that time. So that made life a little bit difficult, and I think 2016 was kind of a carryover of the events from there. And then my mother got sick that year, and June 12th, 2016, I will never forget, because that was the day after my father's 3-year yard site, and that was also when the Pulse nightclub shootings happened.
That's right.
And I think that's really when I started getting more into being Jewish. I think it was around that point where I had been to a candlelight vigil at my temple and decided, yeah, I need this to be a priority in my life right now.
So you re-engaged with Judaism in 2016.
Yes.
More. Huh. What was it about Pulse for you that led you back?
I think it made me think about how many of the problems that I was having they just kind of fell by the wayside at that point. It just made me think to myself, you know what? There are a lot of really horrible things out there.
Right.
And that, as horrible as my life is right now, things could always be a lot worse. I could always be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah. So your anger was at the world more than directed towards, it wasn't towards, was it any towards your,
No.
What's that?
It wasn't directed towards any particular person. It was
Right. It was towards the world. It was towards kind of, why is this happening? And the frustration and, right. And then that puts some things in perspective for you. So you now at the current job, you use some of the art therapy things you learned in that capacity as well?
Yeah, I mean, mostly it's peer support. I would like to be able to introduce some art therapy in there, but yeah, definitely.
So it's peer support. What's that consist of?
Basically, it consists of, talk therapy along with being able to relate to the struggles of the people that you're working with. Having been through some similar situations with mental illness and trauma, many a times the people, they do need somebody who does relate to these struggles to be around them. And it's especially inspiring when they are people who have jobs as counselors, for example. They want to be able to see that there is a way out of being in a bubble of kind of being branded as a person with a mental illness.
Okay.
Specifically, I have bipolar disorder and PTSD.
PTSD brought on by
by my father's passing, mostly. There's another situation, I won't get into it, but it was basically really, really, really complicated by my father's passing and watching him have the stroke at the dinner table.
Yeah, as you had said. Wow. So without, I guess that's something that you still work on on a personal level. That
Yes.
kind of those moments and right. Now, when give me like you're talking to people at your job that
Mhm.
have varying degrees, and you're not putting the personal in though, are you?
What do you mean by the personal?
Well, I'd imagine that you are the one in the authority position, and you're not sharing your personal story with them, but you're kind of getting them to share what's going on in their lives, and then because like
it's actually very mutual. It is very mutual to be
so
able to do this.
You're both sharing.
Yeah, we're both sharing. I think, though, the one thing that I try to like remind myself of is that, wow, did you just see? There was just like a flash.
I did see the flash. Yep.
Okay, so
There's a
my
sign.
thermostat is resetting. Okay, so yeah. Oh, everything is resetting now. Okay, 1 second. So, I mean, I think the one thing that I do just kind of keep in perspective is that, you know, I do have this strong knowledge and wisdom base to draw from. But yeah, ultimately, I am the person who is kind of the one doing the navigating of the
of the people you're speaking to. Wow, no, that's got to be something. My partner's in psychiatry now at Elmhurst Hospital, and I'm getting to hear a little bit about some of her, day to day. But there's definitely her not being able to share kind of her life, but trying to get through to basically all of the patients that she has, and some it's very difficult to connect with. I mean, it's just and I can imagine art can be such a pathway to some people.
big time.
So as we wrap up, you do have a new book. Did your father hear any of your poems or read some while you were really writing?
Yes, he did have a favorite of mine, and it was the one that, to a certain degree, kind of put me on the map as a poet, because it was like the first. I had won a poetry contest. I won like $100 with this poem, and that was a poem called Calculations, which goes back to the whole math thing.
Yeah.
usually just like comes back to that, because it winds up using a lot of mathematical terminology.
Oh, yeah, I think I remember. Didn't you share it at Hellphone?
By word, yes.
That one time I met you. Yeah, I'd love to hear a part of it again if you would like to.
Gladly. Allow me to add my 2 cents to the situation. In return, I would like you to subtract the rhetoric that exits your lips and assist me in keeping divisions from multiplying. Now, before I go off on a tangent, let me tell you about the problem I have evaluated. You see, it seems as if every move you make is calculated. I have tried to mind my P's and Q's regarding this issue, but I cannot help myself from arriving at the solution that your ego-induced pollution is planned out like a logic proof or an algebraic matrix or a quadratic equation or a manic locomotive. From day one, I was able to graph the main points in my brain to the axes labeled X and Y. X signifies your attempts to censor others. Y, because you can. My rage is the product of this. My rage is the product of your strategy to further an agenda. It is merely a fraction of this anger being portrayed. That's right, just a percentage. Your position on the number scale of aggravation cannot be located with mortal eyes. It stretches out to an infinite number of miles. There is no final integer. You see, a range of things bother and depress me, and my mood not only swings like a pendulum and a grandfather clock, but also descends and ascends like a parabola. Therefore, I must dig within my brain and use prior knowledge obtained to plot a path across the map of the way to a poem marked with a black X. And for the most part, I think I do a damn good job at getting from A to B without the help of a tutor. I am comfortable with what I know, and I embrace it. And whatever knowledge I may lack is on me, but I know that you don't know squat if you think you know what little I know. Think I care? No. I may not for this writing to encompass a circular argument, but like a 180-degree angle, let's get something straight and settle the score. I am neither a letter nor a number nor a remedial student. I am just a man with a voice that some may consider noise that triggers violent waves. That is my right. Aren't we supposed to be equal? Shouldn't symbols resembling more than and less than not be applied or be crossed out? Can't we eliminate all unnecessary variables, all unnecessary formulas, all unnecessary postulates, all unnecessary theorems, all unnecessary programs, diagrams, anagrams, acrostics, diagnostics, cross multiples? This long division has gone on for too long, repeating multiple times, like 1/3 written as a decimal. Statistics do not reject this claim, although some want it to be a syntax error or want to believe that I forgot to carry the 2 in my calculation, but the remainder of my tolerance hangs by an unraveling thread. I proudly sign my name on this thesis, and my colleagues who proudly co-sign, given that they possess research on this behavior. So we pooled our data together. We share a very reciprocal relationship. However, it does not take Fibonacci or Pascal or Apollonius or Euclid or Euler or Eratosthenes or Archimedes or Maimonides or Gematria or even the Nation of Islam to deduce this verbal dilemma. Hey, Louis. Your calculations are wrong. The atmosphere provided is negative. The agenda cannot be defined, for it does not compute. Not by any means, not by any modes, not by any standard deviation. So tell me, how do you like them applications? Why would happen again? Eerie.
Yes. With a shout out to Louis there.
Yeah, Farrakhan. I thought of Nation of Islam, and I thought of how he puts all those numbers together. So I just wanted to specify that part.
Right. You know. Oh goodness. Right. And it's a piece that you have command over now, where you can kind of
Yeah, I wrote it back in 2004, and it's just stuck with me since then.
Right. But your dad liked that one, and he had actually heard it performed.
Yes, he had. He loved it. Absolutely.
Oh, that's wonderful. Now he had come to a show, or was just in written.
He had come to some of my shows, and he had read some of my work, and I would read my poetry to him sometimes. So, I really took a lot of pride in what I wrote. So, sharing it with my family was definitely a very good.
Yeah, that piece. It's just it's more than just grade school math. You're on to college level mathematics. Through that. It's just the connection between words and math is always so fascinating to me. I find it.
Oh, for sure.
I'd like to see that poem just in zeros and ones too, and then somebody to crack the code. So as we close, first, is there something that you would like to tell other people maybe that are currently processing a loss, or something that you would tell, I guess, yourself at the time immediately following, that would have been more helpful, or for both someone that's going through it now, that's at the age that you were, and something maybe you tell yourself, a younger version?
It's hard to think about what I would tell myself, but I think the one thing that I would definitely want to express to somebody who is going through grief, allow yourself to go through the motions of what you're going through. Nobody could hold any kinds of feelings of grief against you, because that's why we have that cycle. That's why we have denial, bargaining, anger, depression, and acceptance. I mean, we just have to accept that this is just like the way things go. And even though Kubler-Ross has like these 5 stages, they can come in at any point during the course of your grieving. It's not linear.
Right.
When you really think about it, it's just not a linear pattern. And whatever you're going through in those 5 stages at any given point is totally normal. It doesn't need to be diagnosed. It doesn't need to be pathologized. If you're grieving, you have earned the right to feel any kind of feeling that you so feel inclined to feel.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. I think, this whole conversation will be helpful to others, and I loved every conversation we have, whether it's pop culture related or poetry related with you, Jacob. Is always we go down different pathways, and I hope our friendship continues. It's been great zooming with you with the open mic these past couple weeks. I find that to be just a helpful way of communing with, however, if it's 50,000 or 4 people, just being accountable to one another throughout the course of the week has been helpful to me, and I value that time we've spent, I'd love to share this with other people, whether it's just audio form or the video at some point. But those that are watching, pick up SEANCE for sure. And in the spirit of that, is there anything that you would just say to your father if he were to be listening, whether it's a gesture or a phrase or a word that you would like to pass on and kind of just put out into the world right at this moment?
Yes. My father would always have this rhyme that he would tell every spring. The spring is sprung, the grass is riz. I wonder where the boydie is. The boyd is on the wing, they say, but that's its soid. The wing is on the boyd. Just like a joke that we had,
Yeah. Oh goodness. Well, we're gonna wrap there, and let's I guess all end with a collective soda pop for pops. And I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, Scott. Thank you so much for doing this with me.
Right on. All right. Have a good rest of your day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Newsflash, we're all gonna die, so why don't you just decide to enjoy the ride and laugh with the air like you care, but you don't, and you're broke and you love it anyway.